And we can kind of actually just kind of jump into it.
Sure.
So now I appreciate you joining.
Oh yeah, no
What,
problem.
what do you see? What do you see happening there? So obviously, I mean, you're in Minnesota, in New York. We're not really in the winter yet.
Yeah.
I know you've written some great articles talking about the coming winter and, like you say, outdoor dining. And what do you see happening there in the restaurant sector? What's kind of your what do you see coming here in a few months?
Um, yeah, that's a good question because I mean, like, look, ultimately, the thing that really fixes restaurants is a vaccine and a treatment, and the end of the pandemic. On one hand, I mean, we're seeing higher infection rate, infection numbers, total infection numbers than we've ever seen. At the same time, I mean, consumers are clearly frustrated with quarantine and are showing a willingness to eat at restaurants. I mean, certainly a certain number. I mean, it's reasonable to expect that in the next few months, you're definitely going to see a decline in those numbers in the Midwest and the Northwest and in the Northeast, where when the weather gets colder and people have to move fully indoors, you're going to have people a lot more reluctant to go out, and consequently, delivery and takeout will remain important. I mean, it remains to be seen whether we'll see shutdowns. I don't think we're going to see the types of shutdowns we saw in the spring, which is good for the restaurant industry. Ultimately, people being able to go out to eat is what is driving the business. But that said, I mean, you're still going to have reluctance on the part of a lot of Americans to go out. That's definitely true. They're not going to be going out. They're not going to be working in the office anytime soon. So that's another issue. Still not going to have the types of big events that tend to drive a lot of restaurant sales. So, you're still going to see a fairly depressed market for the next couple of months. And, for a lot of the industry, they're kind of, in bad financial shape, which I wrote about this week. They're in a many restaurant companies remain in a very difficult financial position, and that's going to be the real big question mark going forward. I think that we're still going to see a lot of bankruptcies and a lot of issues where restaurant companies have some fundamental financial issues.
What's the impact you think? I mean, you mentioned as far as the holidays. That's what we got Thanksgiving coming up, and it's normally the time of year where you have family get-togethers, businesses obviously hosting lunches or holiday meals, holiday dinners, or special events. We're not really going to have that. I mean, we normally, as our office, we usually have a nice holiday party. I haven't heard anything. I assume we're not going to this year.
Yeah, we're not even.
I don't think anybody is. So what? I mean, that's
Mhm.
we usually it's at some restaurant or somewhere that I don't know the bill, but it's not small, and
Mhm.
also that times thousands and thousands and thousands of places across the country. I mean, what's the impact on that? It's got to be
Um,
significant.
yeah, I think it's going to be tough for certainly for certain segments of this business again. I mean, for a lot of higher end restaurants, they really did a lot of pretty heavy business in the next couple of months, catering functions
Right.
and things of that nature. Again, continued to be a depressed market. It's going to be really tough for them, because these things aren't going to be held. I mean, I think the broader industry actually surprisingly will do a little better than you might imagine, simply because one of the things that's been a hallmark of this of the pandemic is that when there's been an event of some sort, consumers have celebrated in some form by getting restaurants. They've adapted to it. And a perfect example is Cinco de Mayo, Mother's Day as well. In many restaurants during those holidays, when we were still really early, still pretty shut down throughout much of the country, people ordered massive takeout orders
Okay.
on those certain holidays instead of going out. They still went and did something. They just ordered takeout and they brought it at home. And so I think that you're probably going to see, in fact, you see a lot of restaurants already sort of gearing up for that idea is that people are going to adapt because they still like to celebrate by eating restaurant food. They still like to eat restaurant food.
Right.
That's really unquestioned. I mean,
And they don't want to. Maybe a big part of that is they don't want to make the food either.
yeah. I mean,
I speak for my family.
I think that an underrated driver of the restaurant business, and a really underrated driver is the dishes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily cooking. I think a lot of people are, I mean, a lot of people don't like cooking, right? But I think the dishes are one reason why, I mean, one really disincentive because it's a lot of work to,
Right.
to clean up after all of this. And, so that tends to drive probably more restaurant sales than people imagine. But, and then they just still like celebrating and they don't like doing all that work.
So I think so. We'll probably see a lot of advertising coming up. How Thanksgiving packages and catering and
Yep.
Christmas and Festivus and New Year's and
Oh yeah,
all
we're
those kinds
already
of things.
starting to see it. Already starting to see these
Yeah.
things come forward. Companies really adapting to try to take advantage of that particular market. Thanksgiving is a surprisingly big
Yeah.
restaurant day. Always has been. That's going to be a real, where that goes. Probably going to shift the takeout again. I mean, I think on balance, you have to consider the upcoming holidays, really an overall negative for the overall industry because you're still not going to get those parties, those functions that a lot of employers had and things of that nature. But they'll recover a surprising amount of it, and and then certain restaurants are going to do better.
Out of curiosity, something I haven't really seen written too much, and if I missed, if you wrote about it and I missed, I'm sorry. A big part of that. So it's interesting. You talk about, let's say you could even cover a significant portion of the in-person dining by takeout, but like you said, how important is the loss of the alcohol, like particularly the events, the alcohol
Yeah.
sales, the soda sales that are all just pure profit, I think. So I mean, how critical is that? Because you're not.
Very, very much critical.
Yeah.
It's a real, and that's been the fundamental issue facing a lot of casual diners going forward. And again, it tends to be more concentrated, a little bit more on the higher end places that
Right.
really did rely more heavily on beverages and particularly alcoholic drinks for a lot of their revenue. And it is a higher profit, higher margin item, and doesn't quite take the effort that
Right.
that cooking, say, a steak dinner does.
Yeah.
And so, so that's always been an issue as this industry has been moving towards more of a takeout function. And casual dining restaurants, for instance, are just not really built for that. So that's been an issue where they've had to adapt. I think more, especially, your Applebee's and your Chili's and companies like that have actually really adapted, have been practicing for this for a while. So, they might be in a little bit better shape than you think, but, it's still a significant loss of revenue. And you can't make it up. I mean, chains have tried alcohol delivery and things like that. You can't really make it up that well. You have to find other sources. And so, as that dine-in business drops again, I mean, that business drops and you just really can't make up for the profit. And on top of that, delivery just doesn't, I mean, you have a high cost associated with delivering food.
Right.
And so the profit margins on those are tend to be squeezed.
Yeah, I mean, I know my family, we're getting to go a lot. In fact, we had Chili's the other night. We've done Miller's. We do a lot of really focus also getting a lot of the local restaurants in our area. And I kind of implore my family and my kids who are in college, like, get it, go pick it up. Don't, or have the restaurant delivered. Don't, nothing against Uber Eats or DoorDash. I don't have anything against them, but from a restaurant sector, it really, I mean, it's far more profitable to the restaurant operator if you just get
Oh,
it
yeah.
directly or have them deliver it and don't go third party. And that's something
Yeah.
I know I really focus on is just try to make it as profitable as I can for that restaurant.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. We've seen now a number of restaurant chains have started publicly acknowledging the profit challenges associated with the level of delivery they're doing. And Chipotle's done it. Noodles has done it. I think Fiesta Restaurant Group today did it. They started saying, look, the margins that we get on delivery orders are compressed. We have to deal with it. And so what they're doing is raising, more of them are raising prices on delivery orders. That's going to be a lot more common. Of course, the issue with that is you start raising your prices on delivery orders, you really start having some challenges that way. Profit becomes, because then, people are only going to pay so much.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've done this on chicken wings where I was paying 75, 80% premium for a delivery order than just to pick it up myself. And, and I like chicken wings and I don't know if it's worth 80% to have it delivered to my home. It's not hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like I live 5 minutes away from them. I can go and pick it up. So I've never So, I mean, it's going to be I think, a real issue for a lot of restaurant chains going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you had one of the reasons we kind of connected here today. You had a really interesting article here recently. Actually, you cover the franchise sector,
Mm-hmm.
it's largely the fast food, but certainly casual as well. You had a great article, the 5 problems in franchising that hurt franchisees. That really caught my attention because, like you, I'm involved with a lot of franchise operators, franchisees, franchisors, and you cover the sector as well as anybody out there. What do you see? I mean, you summarize kind of these 5 problems. What do you kind of summarize for us? What do you see as the problem in the franchise sector, and what kind of catches your attention?
Well, the biggest problem is the way franchises are sold. And, in a franchise business, and it's often lost, companies such as, Subway, for instance. Subway doesn't really sell subs. Subway sells the right to use the Subway brand. That's what it sells. It sells that right to other investors who they are the ones that take on the risk of building the restaurant and then operating the restaurant. And it's the franchisee that is the one that's actually selling you the sandwiches. And they just pay a percentage off the Subway. The problem is that these are really complicated investment vehicles. It takes a lot to understand exactly, what's involved in operating a restaurant. It is in many cases a very difficult job to do. You are putting a lot on the line to do it, and the franchise agreement is extremely complicated. Everything is very complicated about it, and yet they get sold akin to how you buy a used car. And they get sold based on emotion. They get sold based on, on this idea that you can live the dream, live the American dream. They are sold to any, and in the problem, now most franchisors want to survive over the long term. They have a long-term history in mind. They want to be a successful franchise. But you can get a lot of companies that want to grow very, very, very fast. And they think if they can sell a lot now, they'll see how many of these can make. Well, the problem is that if you sell it, a person who doesn't have correct financing, who doesn't really have a lot of good experience, who really doesn't have a high net worth, or the franchise could just be a super bad investment. These people can go under, and then they lose everything. So it's the way it gets sold that doesn't really treat it like the investment that it really is. That is one big problem. It happens in a lot of franchises. Quiznos is the penultimate example of a brand that did this. Sold a lot of franchises to a lot of different people, built them everywhere, and then the brand ran into problems and the whole thing collapsed. And like thousands of people literally out of everything that they invested in that brand. So that's one.
And which part of that is, and I guess it ties to that, I mean, the FDD, the franchise disclosure docs, these are really complex legal documents, long and lots of pages. I mean, I often wonder how many franchisees have even read their FDD or even had an attorney perhaps do it. I mean, these are complicated documents. I mean, they really are. I bet most folks have never even read them.
Yeah. 150, 200, 300 pages sometimes. And a lot of it is really just about disclosure and about protecting the franchisor from lawsuits as much as anything else. There's really little regulation behind it, which brings me to the next problem. As problems happen in this business, in the franchise business, there's no real regulatory body that does anything about it. I mean, the FTC on a federal level regulates franchises, but all it really does is require they post this FDD, and then they don't really do anything about it. They don't really enforce it. It's been a long time since the FTC enforced any franchise action. It gets left up to a small handful of states that are willing to do it, and vast majority of states don't enforce franchise law, don't really have any unique franchise law. And so the only real, choice you have if you're a franchisee is to file a lawsuit. That's the only way that these franchisors get regulated in any fashion. Problem, of course, is that you have to have enough money to be able to file a lawsuit. Well, and then, if you don't have the money, if you've lost your investment, you don't really have any money. I mean, when I wrote the series on Burgerim, which is a fast casual burger chain that collapsed, I talked to a lot of franchisees that, well, would-be franchisees that paid their entire life savings for the right to buy into a brand, and they didn't have any money even to talk to a lawyer,
And lost it all with the
Yeah, and say they lost it all.
another horrible story.
Right. So nobody is out there enforcing it. And then, which the next problem is, because there's nobody enforcing it, franchisors get a lot of leeway in dictating that relationship. So you can get a franchisor that will require a franchisee to litigate any dispute within another state. So, and the problem is, if you're a franchisor, franchisors will frequently sell these things all over the place. So I Heart Mac and Cheese, which is a Florida-based franchise that is having some real issues right now. They're in Florida, and they were selling to people in Montana, and then requiring them to litigate it back down in Florida. So, and that means you have to have money to talk to a lawyer in Florida. You have to fly down there. You have to do all those other things. It's a much more expensive proposition. And so you get franchisors that do this, or they just write onerous franchise agreements because they can. Making various requirements. They don't, if they can write provisions in their agreement that essentially, that will require the franchisees to pay a lot of money. So a lot of franchisors are built to take as much money out of the franchisee as possible.
Yeah.
So not only do they get the upfront franchise fee and then the royalty payment, but then they'll also often take a substantial profit off of the supply chain. So a franchisor will run the supply chain, buy the food and the paper and all that other stuff, and then franchisees are required to buy this.
The price.
Right. And then what will happen is the franchisor, to recoup their cost, will write in will get rebates from, Coca-Cola or US Foods or Cisco or whatever company they contract with. Well, then, those vendors will up the charges for franchisees. What ends up happening is that the supposed joint buying power for all of these franchisees gets completely wiped out. And it would be cheaper in some cases. In fact, in many cases, Quiznos, again, the penultimate example on this is that they went through the franchisor, had to go through the franchisor to do this. Franchisor wrote in, took in enormous rebates. The franchisor, by the way, depended on those rebates to make money to pay off a massive amount of debt that they had. And so it would have been cheaper for these Quiznos operators to just quit, start their own sandwich concept, and then they not only not have the 8% royalty or whatever, but then they don't have those higher charges for food. So it's not as cheap to operate a franchisor. So that's another one where you get franchisors that will really do this. They just write in these onerous agreements that franchisees, again, getting back to that FDD, many don't really read or fully comprehend what's going on. It can be hard to see these situations down the road.
Particularly if you're a newbie just getting into the business, maybe particularly in a recessionary type period, where maybe they lost a job and they just see an opportunity here, and they don't have, like you said, they don't have the restaurant experience or the business experience. They're just kind of getting into it as they see an opportunity.
Yeah, they just see an opportunity. Look, I mean, a lot of franchisees, a lot of would-be franchisees just think, hey, I can be my own boss. I can get rich quick. I could do it for next to nothing. I mean, we saw that with the Burgerim thing, where just a lot of people thought, hey, I got 20, 30,000 extra dollars. I'm seeing all these ads for this cool franchise. It's got to work. I'm just going to, and then they get lured in by some slick sales reps or some marketing materials and a cool looking restaurant. And then they send in all of their money. And then they end up having problems finding a site because no landlord is going to give somebody who spent all their savings on the franchise fee, and is completely unqualified to operate the brand. Landlords aren't stupid. They're not going to, sign these franchisees. So, you have situations, and this was the case in I Heart Mac and Cheese, and it's certainly the case with Burgerim, where these companies these franchisees couldn't get leases. So that's another element. You get these people that sign on to this agreement, because a franchisor doesn't care. They just want the $30,000 franchise fee, and then the people can't get a location.
I think I say this. I don't want to sound all negative because I think both of us actually are really big believers in the franchise system. I mean, I've got a lot of clients and friends actually that have generated tremendous income, wealth for them and their families. Sometimes, some instances, I mean, generational type. So there are some phenomenal franchisors and franchisees. Who do you think is doing? Who are some? A couple of examples that are doing it the right way. I mean, like Jersey Mike's, I think, is one. I'm curious.
Jersey Mike's is
phenomenal. Comes to mind.
Yeah, Jersey Mike's is phenomenal. That's one that really does it right.
So I think really, and we're seeing this now in this, this last number of months, seems to really care about their franchisees, about their customers, about the folks that are involved in the brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what Peter Cancro has done over at Jersey Mike's is really cool. I mean, he really does a lot of, things. I mean, you really get the sense from him that he really wants people to do very well and has devised a brand that helps them accomplish that goal. And that's ultimately because he understands, and what Jersey Mike's has found, and look, they're one of the fastest growing restaurant chains in the United States. I mean, they have done very, very well for themselves, and so have their franchisees. And franchising can really, really work when you have that alignment, when you have a franchisor that understands that they don't do well if their franchisees don't do well, and are built towards helping their franchisees succeed. And that is super important if you are going to rely on small scale operators that have only a few handful, 2, 3, 4 stores at most, and really rely on those stores for their living, and that's what they do well. That is what all the franchisors, the good franchisors do really well. Another one is Culver's, where they largely develop the franchisees from within, and the franchisees operate only a small number of stores, but they make a really good living doing it, and it's a brand that performs very well. So yeah, I mean, McDonald's is a perfect example of I was just talking with, and I just did a presentation to their franchisee association. I'm sitting there realizing that, look, I'm in this room with a bunch of millionaires, and in some cases, people who are worth well into the 9 figures. Wow. And, they make a lot of money. And it's because that's, what the brand historically has been about. Where they understood they needed their franchisees to do well. And that's what works. The problem you get into is when the franchisor doesn't care, or is just, so caught up in, making their own money that they just really completely forget that their franchisee needs to make money if that brand is going to do well. Because if their franchisee makes more money, you make more money through more royalty payments because that franchisee sales are higher. That franchisee is going to want to build more units. And so then you make more money on top of that, you grow more. So it just, that's how this thing works. And when it doesn't work that way, it fails.
Where do you see opportunities now, out of curiosity? I mean, you talk with a lot of operators, a lot of brands. Are there any brands out there or sectors that are kind of catching your attention right now, or?
Well, I mean, we're living in a limited service future, right? It's going to be a drive-through world. Takeout and delivery is going to be important going forward. I mean, I think that, but I also don't think that dine-in is going away. I mean, people are literally risking their lives to go out to eat at restaurants. Right. I mean, let's face it. So the person that can devise a business model that, and these are the ones that are going to win, are the people that can build a model that can adapt to both worlds really well, that can have a really good dine-in business, but a menu that travels well, right? And a model that doesn't rely so heavily on, one or the other. I mean, I think look, I mean, the beverage business is really good. It needs to be sort of viewed almost in many respects as if um, almost incremental business because, I mean, as takeout is becoming more important going forward, I mean, that beverage business can't be as
Gonna get
important.
lesser and lesser, right?
Yeah. So the person that can devise a concept that can take advantage of both is real, and that's I think what you're going to see a lot of. You're going to see a ton of development on that front.
I said it seems like I mean Texas, and I think you've written about. I mean Texas Roadhouse is a brand that, pre-COVID almost prided themselves that they really had no interest in takeout, and had to adapt and realize they couldn't have that same attitude. And it seems like they've really adapted, and I think going forward will be much more inclined to embrace takeout as a part of their business in reality.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, without question, they need to. I mean, Texas Roadhouse is a perfect example of that was people demanded takeout from Texas Roadhouse. Ken Taylor is I mean, he's fantastic in part because he's like he has in mind what he knows is good for the restaurant business, and he's not going to compromise on that. And it's reflected in how his chain has operated and how it is succeeded. And he's like, I worry about, they didn't really go after that takeout business. Consumers demanded it. And they started to they started to say, we got to deal with it. We're never going to do third-party delivery. And they still don't. Mm-hmm. Even with the world in a massive pandemic, they refuse to do it, which of course you can do if you're in the financial position that they were in going into the pandemic. They were in very strong position. So they could afford to take that, that strategy. But look, they adapted extremely quickly to that business, and now they have a workable business going forward that will protect them, from a potential loss in dine-in business.
Yeah, that's interesting times. I mean, I don't know about you. Yeah. I'm excited about what's coming. I think we're going to see a lot of adaptations. I mean, you've written about the changes in the drive-through. We just talked about with casual dining. So I think the restaurant sector is going to survive. Like you said, casual dining, dine-in is going to still be there. It's so much a fabric of what we do and of our lives. So I'm excited to see where we are, a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. I think there'll be some great adaptations in reality.
Oh yeah. I think 5 years we're going to look at a bigger industry. An industry, I think that within 5 years the industry will have fully recovered and is growing again. So we'll be back not only to pre-pandemic levels, but we'll be above that. But I think that the industry is going to look very, very much different. Not so much, I mean, it's not going to be as evident in the fast food business where it's already sort of built towards takeout, although you're going to see a lot more flexible designs and fancier drive-throughs and no seat arrangements and that sort of thing. But I think that it's the full service and especially the independent business that's going to be really interesting to go forward. The independent restaurant is the most, fundamentally it's the most vulnerable because they're small and they can easily go out of business. But there's always somebody willing to step in and open a restaurant, and that is as people say, people are never going to stop opening restaurants. And what the independent restaurant fabric looks like within 5, 6, 7 years is going to be fascinating because it's going to be really influenced by what's happened over these last 9 months.
Well, I mean, even, opening an independent restaurant in a cloud kitchen or a ghost kitchen, I mean, that opportunity to be out there to open a restaurant far cheaper and, maybe there's a virtual type concept. Yeah. So it could be interesting. So, well, very cool. It's always great catching up with you.
Always.
You're as knowledgeable as anybody in the restaurant business. So it's always great catching up with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Be well.